Hello there. I hope you've had a good day. How about some cake? I don't know when you normally eat cake. To be honest, if I'm awake, it's cake time. So why don't we have some cake together? We're looking at the story of Joshua. Comes after those first 5 books in the scriptures, often known as the Torah. We then move on to the book of Joshua, which picks up from where we left off yesterday. And Joshua, with his pal Caleb, lead the people of Israel across the River Jordan into the Promised Land. That's what the first 12 chapters of the book of Joshua are all about. It's the story of spying out the land, making the preparations, and then going into the Promised Land itself. That's the first half of the book. The second half of the book is then when they're in the Promised Land, dividing up the land between the tribes of Israel. There are 12 tribes, as you know. It gets a bit complicated because the Levites, because they're the priestly caste, they don't get their own bit of land. So the tribe of Joseph is divided into 2, Ephraim and Manasseh. It gets even more complicated if you read the fine print because Manasseh gets split in half, some of it on the east of the Jordan, some on the west of the Jordan. We don't really need to worry too much about that. The point is that each of those tribes of Israel gets its own bit of the cake. And as with food in this house, probably in your house, whenever something sweet like this gets divided up, there's an argument. That slice is bigger than my slice. I don't want that bit. I want that bit. And so it goes on. And there's a few stories like that in the book of Joshua as the tribes compete over who should have which bit of land. There's also some interesting little asides as well. There's the story of Rahab, who you'll remember helps those who spy out the land, and in exchange for helping them, she gets her freedom. When they invade, she lets down a red cord from the tower walls and is protected. So they cross into the Promised Land, and then the land is divided. But the book of Joshua is also a bit uncomfortable because, as well as the sweet stuff, being given land, there's also a bit of this stuff. As God seems to order that as the people go in, they root out those who are already there and put them to the sword. How does that square with a God of love? Did the people of Israel mishear? Or is God simply dealing with a primitive kind of people, and he wouldn't deal with people like that today in the 21st century, but he has to lead them on a bit of a journey, and that's where they are at that stage? Well, people debate all of that kind of stuff. It's uncomfortable reading, though, particularly with our own history throughout the world, how we've treated people, where we've gone into places and divided up the cake and those who are already there. Uncomfortable stuff. But of course, the book of Joshua was handed down the generations for the people of Israel. It was more than just history. And that's why the book of Joshua, along with the book of Judges, along with the books of Samuel and Kings, aren't known as history. They're known as the former prophets. The later prophets are Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And then the fourth one is a load of them all together, the 12 minor prophets. More about those in a few weeks' time. But Joshua is the first of the 4 former prophets. And that's interesting because what that tells us is this book is given to succeeding generations as prophecy. We often think of prophecy as like crystal ball kind of stuff. That's not what prophecy is all about. Prophecy is a way of understanding the past in the present in order to help us grasp reality now, and in order to give us hope for the future, to shape the kind of future that we pray for and that we work for. And that's what this narrative in Joshua does. It's not just given as history, it's given as a resource for people as they travel down through the centuries to try and make sense of their identity in the present and to inspire them as they consider the future. And of course, there are many times in Israel's future, as this book is handed down, when instead of land, this is all they have. just crumbs of an inheritance that was theirs. And so Joshua helps them to reflect on what has been, but also as they go back into the land after exile, as they live in the land under foreign occupation by the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans, what does it mean to be in this land that God has given to us? And how do we live in this land alongside people who are our enemies? And so Joshua is deliberately this stuff as well as the sweet stuff, because it forces Israel to wrestle with the reality of its past, with the reality of its self-understanding, with the reality of its history in the present, as it seeks to make sense of where they've come from, of where they are, and of where they might go in the future. And that's why those stories about Rahab and the Gibeonites are so crucial, because in that sweeping narrative, you get little glimpses of grace, giving shelter to the prostitute Rahab, living at peace with those who seek peace, even though they are not part of the people of Israel. Perhaps giving clues as to how Israel might live in disorientated times, when instead of the prized portion of its land, it's dealing with the crumbs that are left. The book of Joshua, then, is about that entry into the promised land, the dividing up of the land, but it's about so much more than just the history of a nation. It's about its present as it orientates itself where it finds itself. And it's also a resource as it journeys into the future, asking deliberately difficult questions in order to make the people wrestle with their past, with their reality of their present, and what might be as they journey forwards into the future. Let's continue the story tomorrow then with the book of Judges. And if you think that was uncomfortable reading, just wait till tomorrow.